As Jim Rohn warned, we all suffer one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. You don't rise into your dream life, you outgrow your current self. Die daily is the death of who you are, so who you're meant to be can finally breathe. Every day you wake up, something must die, your distractions, excuses, and inordinate cravings, or your dreams will. Die daily, or slowly bury your future. This is not a message about punishment. It's a message about choice. And every chapter that follows is an exploration of that choice. Chapter 1. The quiet trade we all make. There is a simple truth most people don't notice until much later in life. Nothing meaningful comes without a cost. Not success. Not health. Not peace of mind. Not even happiness. Every outcome we live with is the result of a trade we made somewhere along the way, often quietly, often unconsciously. Many people feel stuck without knowing why. They work hard, stay busy, and mean well, yet years pass and little changes. The reason is rarely a lack of desire. It's usually a lack of awareness around what they are giving up every day without realizing it. Die daily begins here, not with drama or intensity, but with honesty. This is about seeing the trade clearly. When we talk about progress, we often focus on what we want to gain: a better body, more money, deeper confidence, creative fulfillment, freedom. What we talk about far less is what must be released to make space for those things. Progress is not free because time, energy, and attention are limited. You cannot invest them everywhere. Choosing one direction automatically means not choosing another. That isn't pessimism, it's how life works. This applies to everyone, regardless of background or ambition. A person who wants better health must give up some comfort. A person who wants mastery must give up ease. A person who wants clarity must give up distraction. None of these are punishments. They are exchanges. The mistake many people make is believing they can gain without letting go. That belief leads to frustration. When progress feels slow or absent, they assume something is wrong with them. Often, nothing is wrong. They're simply paying for comfort instead of growth. Very few people wake up and decide to ruin their future. Regret doesn't usually come from a single reckless decision. It comes from small repeated choices that feel harmless in the moment. One skipped workout doesn't matter. One night of staying up too late doesn't matter. One day of procrastination doesn't matter. And individually, that's true. The problem is not the single decision. It's the pattern that forms when those decisions become normal. Over time, the cost compounds. A year passes, and fitness feels harder to start. Another year, and energy declines. A dream gets postponed because now isn't the right time. Eventually, the story changes. It's no longer "I'm planning to." It becomes "I almost did." This is what drifting into regret looks like. There's no dramatic failure. No clear breaking point. Just a slow accumulation of avoided effort and unexamined choices. Most people don't notice the trade they're making until the bill arrives. The most important idea is simple but often misunderstood. Comfort is not neutral. Comfort feels harmless because it rarely hurts immediately. It soothes. It relaxes. It makes the present moment easier. But comfort always has a direction. It pulls life toward maintenance rather than growth. This doesn't mean comfort is bad. Rest, enjoyment, and ease all have their place. The issue arises when comfort becomes the default response to challenge. When discomfort is avoided not occasionally, but consistently. In everyday life, this looks ordinary. Choosing entertainment over effort after a long day, choosing convenience over intention, choosing distraction over reflection, choosing short-term relief over long-term progress. Each choice feels reasonable on its own. Together, they shape a future. Awareness begins when we stop asking, "Does this feel good right now?" and start asking, "What does this choice make easier or harder tomorrow?" Whether we acknowledge it or not, we are always paying a price. Effort has a cost. Discipline has a cost. Focus has a cost. But so does avoidance. So does distraction. So does delay. The difference is timing. The cost of discipline is paid up front, in small, manageable amounts. The cost of regret is paid later, often all at once, when options feel narrower and time feels heavier. Understanding this reframes self-discipline. It is no longer about being strong or weak. It becomes about being intentional, about choosing which cost you are willing to live with. This is not about judging past choices. Everyone has paid for comfort at some point. The goal is not guilt. The goal is clarity. Here is the central insight of this chapter. If you don't choose the cost chooses you. When you choose discipline, you choose your cost deliberately. You decide where effort goes. You decide what discomfort is worth enduring. When you avoid choosing, life still charges you. But it charges in ways you didn't consciously agree to: missed opportunities, eroded confidence, quiet dissatisfaction. Choosing the cost does not mean becoming rigid or extreme. It means paying attention. It means asking better questions. What am I trading this hour for? What habit am I reinforcing right now? What future does this choice quietly support? These questions don't require dramatic answers. They require honesty. One common misunderstanding is believing this mindset demands constant intensity. It doesn't. Die daily is not about self-denial for its own sake. It is about proportion. Another misunderstanding is assuming that sacrifice guarantees success. It doesn't. Effort is necessary, but it doesn't control outcomes. What it does control is self-respect. And self-respect is not a small thing. It changes how you show up, how you decide, and how resilient you become when life doesn't cooperate. There is also nuance here. Life has seasons. There are times for pushing and times for restoring. The principle is not about never resting. It's about not drifting unconsciously. Die daily is not dramatic. It is practical. It happens in quiet moments. When you close one more tab instead of opening another, when you stop negotiating with yourself about something you already decided matters, when you act before motivation arrives, when you say no without needing to justify it. These moments don't look impressive. They don't get applause. But they accumulate. And accumulation is how lives change. Every life is a collection of trades. Some are intentional. Many are not. I am not asking you to overhaul your life overnight. It's asking you to notice what you're already giving up, often without realizing it. Because something is always being exchanged. Time for comfort, or time for growth. Ease for now, or options later. Short-term relief, or long-term direction. The philosophy of Die Daily begins with this awareness. Not with force. Not with pressure. But with clarity. Once you see the trade clearly, you can finally choose it. And that is where change actually starts. Chapter 2. Why pleasure feels safer than purpose. There is a quiet moment most people recognize but rarely examine. It usually comes at the end of a long day. The work is done, or at least paused. The body is tired. The mind is crowded. And there is a choice to be made, often without much thought. Do you reach for something that soothes, distracts, or entertains? Or do you sit with the harder question, is this the life I meant to be building? People don't struggle with lack of ambition. They struggle with exhaustion, uncertainty, and emotional overload. In that state, pleasure feels safer than purpose. Not because purpose isn't meaningful, but because it asks more of us when we already feel spent. Understanding this dynamic is essential to the idea of Die Daily. Without it, discipline feels like self-punishment. With it, discipline becomes an act of care. Instant gratification is often framed as a character flaw. That framing is not only unhelpful, it's inaccurate. Instant gratification is a shortcut. It offers quick relief from discomfort, stress, boredom, or uncertainty. It doesn't require planning. It doesn't demand courage. It works immediately, even if briefly. This makes it incredibly appealing, especially in modern life. After a long day of responsibilities, stimulation feels easier than reflection. Consumption feels easier than creation. Distraction feels easier than deciding what truly matters. There is nothing inherently wrong with pleasure. Enjoyment, rest, and reward are part of a healthy life. The issue is not pleasure itself, but unexamined pleasure. Pleasure without restraint. Pleasure used not to restore, but to avoid. This distinction matters. Purpose is meaningful, but it is not always emotionally light. Purpose requires direction, and direction requires choice. Choice introduces responsibility. Responsibility introduces the possibility of failure. When purpose is clear and connected to action, it can feel energizing. But when purpose feels distant, undefined, or overwhelming, it becomes emotionally heavy. It raises questions that don't have immediate answers. What should I commit to? What if I choose wrong? What if I try and fail? What if I succeed and it changes everything? In contrast, pleasure asks nothing beyond the present moment. It doesn't question your identity. It doesn't challenge your trajectory. It doesn't require you to decide who you're becoming. In this way, pleasure feels safer, not because it is better, but because it is quieter. Many habits are not about enjoyment. They are about relief. Scrolling, binge-watching, snacking, constant background noise. These behaviors often function as emotional anesthesia. They dull discomfort just enough to get through the evening without having to think too deeply. This is not a moral judgment. It is an observation. When life feels uncertain or overwhelming, the mind looks for stability. Predictable pleasure provides that. It offers a sense of control in moments where larger questions feel unmanageable. But over time, this relief becomes a pattern. And patterns shape identity. A person may not consciously decide to avoid purpose. They simply get used to numbing the discomfort that purpose brings up. Habits form where effort meets emotion. When an activity reliably reduces discomfort, the mind learns to repeat it. This happens gradually. What starts as an occasional indulgence becomes a default response. After a while, the habit is no longer about pleasure at all. It's about avoiding the quiet space where self-reflection might occur. This is why people often say they feel busy but unfulfilled. Their time is full, but their direction is unclear. Their days are occupied, but their deeper intentions remain untouched. Understanding this helps remove shame from the conversation. The problem is not that people are weak. It's that they've trained themselves, unintentionally, to escape rather than engage. It's important to be precise here. Pleasure itself is not addictive in every context. What becomes addictive is the relief from discomfort that pleasure provides when nothing else is addressing the underlying issue. When purpose feels unclear or unreachable, pleasure fills the gap. It becomes the primary source of comfort and meaning, even though it was never meant to carry that weight. Over time, the threshold increases. What once felt satisfying becomes insufficient. More stimulation is needed to achieve the same level of relief. This is not a failure of willpower. It is a signal that something deeper is missing. The insight here is subtle but powerful. Pleasure becomes excessive when purpose is absent or postponed. Restraint is often misunderstood as denial. In reality, restraint is discernment. It is the ability to pause and ask, is this helping me move toward the life I want, or helping me avoid it? Restraint does not mean eliminating pleasure. It means placing pleasure in its proper role. Pleasure can restore energy. It cannot replace direction. When restraint is rooted in self-respect, it does not feel harsh. It feels steady. It feels like choosing long-term alignment over short-term relief. This is where die daily becomes practical. It's not about rejecting enjoyment. It's about dying to the reflex of escape. One common misunderstanding is believing that purpose should always feel inspiring. In reality, purpose often feels demanding before it feels fulfilling. Clarity usually comes after engagement, not before. Another misunderstanding is thinking that cutting pleasure entirely will solve the problem. It won't. Suppression creates its own backlash. Sustainable change comes from understanding, not force. There is also a trade-off worth acknowledging. Choosing purpose often means tolerating discomfort longer than feels comfortable. This is not glamorous. It is simply part of growth. Awareness begins when you notice your patterns without judgment. When you see how often relief replaces intention. Understanding deepens when you connect those patterns to emotional states, fatigue, uncertainty, fear, or boredom. The insight is this: pleasure is not the enemy of purpose. It becomes a problem only when it replaces purpose. When purpose is clarified and broken into manageable steps, the need for constant escape diminishes naturally. At the end of the day, most people are not choosing pleasure over purpose. They are choosing relief over uncertainty. Not what's wrong with me, but what am I trying to avoid feeling right now? Purpose does not demand perfection. It asks for presence. It asks you to stay with the question a little longer before reaching for the answer that numbs. Die daily does not mean rejecting pleasure. It means letting go of the habit of hiding inside it. When pleasure is no longer your refuge, purpose has room to speak. And when purpose begins to speak, even quietly, the need to escape starts to fade. Chapter 3. The Self That Must End. There comes a point in every meaningful change where effort alone stops working. You can try harder, plan better, and motivate yourself more, yet the results stay the same. When that happens, the issue is rarely strategy. It is identity. People try to build a new life while holding tightly to an old self. They want different outcomes but keep the same assumptions, the same stories, and the same inner rules. Die daily becomes personal here, because real growth does not begin with doing more. It begins with letting something familiar fall away. This is not about rejecting who you are. It is about recognizing who you no longer need to be. Before going further, it's important to clarify what identity means in this context. Identity is not your personality, your past, or your worth. It is the collection of beliefs you hold about who you are and what you do. It is the quiet narrative that runs in the background of your decisions. I'm just not disciplined. I've always been this way. I work better under pressure. I'm not the type of person who follows through. These statements may feel factual, but they are interpretations shaped by past experiences. Over time, they become defaults. And defaults shape behavior. When identity stays the same, behavior tends to follow it. And when behavior stays the same, results rarely change. The version of you that procrastinates, rationalizes, and avoids discomfort is not broken. It is adaptive. It learned how to cope in a particular environment. At some point, avoiding effort may have reduced stress. Delaying decisions may have prevented failure. Staying within familiar limits may have felt safer than risking disappointment. That version of you did its job. The problem arises when survival strategies are carried into seasons that require leadership. What once protected you begins to restrict you. This is where many people get stuck. They judge themselves harshly for behaviors that once made sense. Shame replaces curiosity, and change becomes harder, not easier. Understanding this allows for a different approach. Instead of fighting the old self, you can acknowledge it, and then move beyond it. One of the most practical insights in personal growth is this: your current identity is producing your current results. This is not a statement of blame. It is a statement of causation. If you see yourself as someone who tries, you will try. If you see yourself as someone who finishes, you will finish more often. If you see yourself as someone who avoids discomfort, you will find reasons to avoid it. This plays out in everyday moments. When a task feels difficult and you negotiate instead of act, when you delay starting because the conditions aren't perfect, when you explain away inconsistency instead of addressing it. These are not failures of discipline. They are expressions of identity. A common misunderstanding is that identity is fixed. That belief alone limits growth. Identity is not a permanent trait. It is a pattern reinforced by repetition. Patterns can change. Slowly, deliberately, and unevenly, but they can change. Seeing identity as flexible doesn't mean pretending to be someone you're not. It means recognizing that who you are is shaped by what you repeatedly do and affirm. When people say, "That's just who I am," they are often confusing familiarity with truth. Growth begins when that sentence becomes, "That's who I've been." Letting go of an old identity can feel unsettling. There is comfort in the familiar, even when it no longer serves you. The old self may be limiting, but it is known. The new self is uncertain. This is where fear often shows up, not fear of failure, but fear of losing coherence. If you stop seeing yourself the way you always have, who are you then? The goal is not to erase your past. It is to update your self-concept, to allow it to reflect who you are becoming, not just who you were. This process requires patience. Identity shifts do not happen through declarations. They happen through consistent, aligned action. The self that must end rarely announces itself loudly. It appears in subtle ways. In the moment you choose comfort over commitment, in the excuse that sounds reasonable but delays action, in the quiet lowering of standards, just for today. These moments are small, but they are formative. Each one reinforces either the old identity or the emerging one. Die daily does not mean dramatic reinvention. It means noticing these moments and choosing differently, even when no one is watching. Becoming someone new requires giving up something valuable, the comfort of self-justification. The old self often comes with well-practiced explanations. Reasons why things didn't happen. Stories that protect self-esteem without requiring change. Letting go of these stories can feel like losing a shield. You become more exposed, more accountable, more honest. This is the trade-off. But what you gain is clarity. And clarity creates momentum. One common misunderstanding is thinking you must completely kill the old self. That language is metaphorical. In practice, it means reducing its authority, not denying its existence. Another misunderstanding is believing that identity change happens all at once. It doesn't. It unfolds gradually, often unevenly. Progress here is measured in consistency, not intensity. It's also worth acknowledging that change can feel lonely. As your identity shifts, familiar dynamics may no longer fit. This discomfort is real, and it is part of the process. Awareness begins when you notice that effort alone isn't producing change. When you recognize patterns repeating despite good intentions. Understanding comes when you see those patterns as expressions of identity, not character flaws. The insight is this: to become someone new, you must stop protecting who you used to be. This does not require self-criticism. It requires self-honesty. Every day, you are reinforcing an identity, either consciously or by default. You are telling yourself, through action or inaction, who you are allowed to be. The self that must end is not bad. It is simply no longer sufficient. Letting it go does not diminish you. It makes space. And in that space, a quieter, stronger version of you begins to form, not through force, but through alignment. This is not about becoming someone else overnight. It is about releasing what no longer belongs to the life you are building. And that is the beginning of real change. Chapter 4. Discipline is not harsh, it's honest. For many people, the word discipline carries a weight it doesn't deserve. It brings to mind rigidity, punishment, and a kind of inner severity that feels exhausting just to imagine. Because of this, discipline is often resisted, postponed, or treated as something to endure rather than understand. Misunderstanding quietly keeps people stuck. When discipline is seen as harsh, it feels like a threat to freedom. But when discipline is understood for what it truly is, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a source of calm, of order, of trust in oneself. Daily reframes discipline not as force, but as honesty, and honesty has a way of simplifying life. Discipline is clarity applied consistently. Clarity means knowing what matters. Consistency means acting in alignment with that knowledge over time. Discipline is not about pushing harder, it is about removing confusion. When people say they lack discipline, they often mean they feel torn, pulled in multiple directions, unsure which voice inside them to follow. Discipline resolves that tension by answering a simple question in advance. What do I stand for, and what do I act on? This is why discipline, when done well, feels steady rather than aggressive. It reduces internal negotiation. It replaces constant decision-making with quiet alignment. If you observe people who are genuinely disciplined, not performative or extreme, but grounded, you'll notice something consistent. They are rarely frantic, rarely reactive, rarely loud about their boundaries. They don't argue with themselves for long. They don't dramatize saying no. They don't need to constantly recommit because their priorities are already clear. In everyday life, this looks simple. They leave when they said they would. They stop when something no longer aligns. They don't explain their choices excessively. This calm is not accidental. It comes from decisiveness, from knowing where energy belongs and where it doesn't. Many people assume chaos comes from having too much to do. Often, it comes from not knowing what to say no to. Indecision creates friction. Every unresolved priority competes for attention. Every unclear boundary drains mental energy. Over time, this creates exhaustion that feels like laziness but is actually overwhelm. Discipline reduces chaos by narrowing the field. It simplifies life by removing what is not essential. When you know what matters, many decisions make themselves. Awareness begins when you notice how much energy is spent negotiating with yourself. How often you revisit the same choices because they were never fully decided. A critical shift happens when discipline is no longer framed as punishment for weakness, but as alignment with values. Punishment is reactive. It comes after failure. Alignment is proactive. It guides behavior before conflict arises. For example, you don't force yourself to work late every night. You protect certain hours because you value focus and rest. You don't ban distractions aggressively. You design your environment to support attention. You don't rely on guilt. You rely on clarity. This approach respects human limits. It acknowledges that willpower is finite and that structure exists to support, not suppress. Discipline is self-respect expressed through behavior. Self-respect is often talked about in abstract terms, but it becomes real through action. When you keep your word to yourself, even in small ways, trust builds. When you break it repeatedly, trust erodes. This shows up in subtle ways. How seriously you take your own plans. Whether you follow through when no one is watching. How quickly you recover when you fall off track. Discipline is not about perfection. It is about reliability. And reliability is calming. Discipline does involve trade-offs. It limits options in the short term. It requires restraint. It can feel restrictive before it feels liberating. This is worth acknowledging honestly. Saying no to something appealing now can feel uncomfortable. Choosing structure can feel boring at first. But over time, discipline expands freedom by creating momentum and reducing regret. The trade-off is immediate comfort for long-term ease. One common misunderstanding is that discipline requires constant intensity. In reality, sustainable discipline is often quiet and unremarkable. Another misunderstanding is that discipline eliminates emotion. It doesn't. It simply prevents emotion from making every decision. There is also a belief that discipline stifles creativity. For many, the opposite is true. Structure provides the stability creativity needs to flourish. Awareness reveals that much stress comes from unclear standards. When expectations are vague, effort feels inconsistent. Understanding shows discipline as a tool for alignment, not control. It organizes energy around what matters most. The insight is this: discipline is not about being hard on yourself, it is about being honest with yourself. Honesty simplifies. And simplicity creates peace. Not as a taskmaster. Not as a test of strength. But as a quiet agreement between who you are and how you live. When discipline is rooted in clarity, it stops feeling harsh. It starts feeling supportive. You waste less energy arguing with yourself. You move through your days with fewer regrets and fewer second guesses. In this sense, discipline is not the opposite of freedom. It is the foundation of it. And as Die Daily continues, discipline becomes less about what you force yourself to do, and more about what you no longer need to resist. That is where inner peace begins. Chapter 5. The Death of Distraction. Distraction is often treated as a modern inconvenience, something caused by technology, busy schedules, or a lack of discipline. But for most people, distraction is not the real problem. It is a symptom, a response, a way of avoiding something more demanding than boredom. Many people feel constantly busy yet strangely unfulfilled. Their days are full, their calendars crowded, but the work that truly matters keeps getting pushed aside. They assume the issue is poor time management. More often, it is unresolved inner tension. Die Daily asks us to look at distraction not as a failure of focus, but as a strategy of avoidance. At a practical level, distraction is anything that pulls attention away from what you intended to focus on. But at a deeper level, distraction serves an emotional purpose. Distraction helps us avoid depth. It keeps us moving on the surface of life, where nothing asks too much of us. Depth requires presence, commitment, and the willingness to sit with uncertainty. Distraction offers relief from all three. This is why distraction often increases when life feels unclear. When priorities are vague, attention wanders. When direction is uncertain, anything feels better than stillness. Understanding this reframes distraction from a personal flaw into a signal. It is information about where clarity is missing. Many people label themselves as lazy when they struggle to focus. In reality, they are often overextended. Their energy is fragmented across too many obligations, interests, and inputs. A scattered mind is not an idle mind. It is an overloaded one. This shows up in everyday life. Starting tasks but rarely finishing them. Consuming large amounts of information without applying it. Switching contexts constantly and feeling drained by the end of the day. The issue is not effort. It is dispersion. Energy leaks out through constant switching, leaving little left for meaningful progress. Recognizing this reduces unnecessary self-criticism. It also points toward a different solution. Distraction often fills emotional gaps. When something feels uncomfortable, unclear, or demanding, distraction offers an immediate alternative. The gap might be uncertainty about direction, fear of committing and failing, the discomfort of starting something important, the weight of responsibility that comes with depth. Instead of addressing the gap, distraction masks it. It keeps us occupied so we don't have to confront the underlying question: what actually deserves my attention? Awareness begins when we notice not just what distracts us, but when we reach for distraction. Focus thrives on clarity. When priorities are well-defined, attention naturally aligns with them. When priorities are vague, attention drifts. Many people attempt to improve focus by trying harder, cutting distractions aggressively, or blaming themselves. These approaches often fail because they don't address the root issue. If everything feels important, nothing truly is. Understanding this shifts the work from managing attention to clarifying values. Focus becomes less about effort and more about alignment. A common response to distraction is to add structure, tools, or productivity systems. These can help, but only to a point. If the underlying priorities are unclear, doing more often increases overwhelm. More tasks, more inputs, more commitments, all competing for the same limited attention. The result is not focus, but fatigue. This is where Die Daily offers a different approach. Instead of adding, it subtracts. Focus is not created by doing more. It is created by removing what doesn't belong. This removal is not dramatic. It is deliberate. It involves asking, what am I doing out of habit rather than intention? What commitments no longer align with my direction? What inputs add noise without adding value? In everyday terms, this might mean limiting how much information you consume, reducing unnecessary obligations, creating protected time for what matters most, letting go of activities that feel busy but unfulfilling. This kind of simplification requires honesty. It also requires accepting that saying no will sometimes feel uncomfortable. Depth demands trade-offs. It limits breadth. When you choose to focus deeply on something, you choose not to engage with many other things. This can feel like loss at first. You may worry about missing out or falling behind. These concerns are natural. But depth offers something distraction never can: progress that compounds. Mastery. Meaning. Acknowledging this trade-off helps set realistic expectations. Focus is not about having it all. It is about choosing what truly matters. One common misunderstanding is believing that eliminating distractions entirely is possible or desirable. It isn't. Life will always include interruptions and competing demands. Another misunderstanding is assuming that focus should feel effortless. In reality, focus often feels quiet and demanding at first, especially when depth has been avoided for a long time. It's also important to recognize that distraction can sometimes signal the need for rest. Not all avoidance is pathological. Discernment matters. Awareness is noticing when distraction shows up and what it replaces. Understanding reveals that distraction thrives where priorities are unclear and emotional gaps are unresolved. The insight is this: focus is not about force, it is about fit. When your actions align with your values, focus requires less effort. When they don't, distraction fills the space. The death of distraction does not come from fighting every impulse. It comes from simplifying life until attention has somewhere meaningful to land. Dying daily means letting go of excess, not just in tasks, but in mental noise. When you remove what doesn't belong, what remains grows stronger. Depth returns. Energy consolidates. And attention becomes a resource you invest, not something constantly stolen. Distraction fades not because you tried harder, but because you chose more wisely. And in that choice, focus becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural consequence of clarity. Chapter 6. Choosing the pain that builds you. There is a quiet truth most people understand instinctively, even if they've never put it into words. Life will hurt in one way or another. Pain is not an exception to the human experience. It is part of it. What varies is not whether pain appears, but how it appears and what it produces. People live as though pain can be avoided entirely. They organize their lives around comfort, relief, and ease, hoping to sidestep discomfort altogether. Over time, they discover that pain still arrives, only now it arrives as regret, dissatisfaction, and a sense of having lived below their potential. Die Daily reaches an emotional anchor here, because it asks a difficult but liberating question. Which pain are you willing to carry? Pain, in this context, does not only mean physical suffering. It includes emotional strain, mental effort, uncertainty, and the discomfort of growth. These forms of pain show up whenever something meaningful is at stake. Trying to eliminate pain entirely leads to avoidance. Avoidance may reduce discomfort temporarily, but it does not remove consequences. It simply delays them. Awareness begins when we stop asking how to avoid pain and start asking how to relate to it. This shift changes everything. Not all pain is the same. One of the most useful distinctions we can make is between constructive pain and destructive pain. Constructive pain is tied to effort, learning, and growth. It feels uncomfortable, sometimes sharp, but it moves. It has an arc. You feel it while stretching beyond your current limits, and then it subsides as capacity increases. Destructive pain is tied to avoidance, stagnation, and missed opportunities. It often feels dull, persistent, and hard to locate. It lingers because nothing is changing. Understanding this distinction helps remove confusion. The goal is not to suffer unnecessarily, but to recognize which discomfort is building something and which is quietly eroding it. The pain of discipline is immediate and specific. It shows up when you act against inertia. It's the discomfort of starting when you don't feel ready. The tension of saying no when saying yes would be easier. The strain of consistency when motivation fades. This pain has a clear source, effort. And because it has a source, it also has a direction. Over time, the same actions that once felt difficult become familiar. The pain diminishes as competence grows. This doesn't mean discipline becomes effortless, but it does become lighter. The initial resistance fades because the body and mind adapt. The pain of regret works differently. It is often quiet and cumulative. It shows up when you realize time has passed and little has changed. When opportunities feel fewer. When choices feel narrower. Regret does not usually arrive with intensity. It settles in slowly, often masked as dissatisfaction or restlessness. Unlike the pain of discipline, it doesn't point clearly to action. It points backward. This is what makes it heavy. It cannot be resolved by effort alone. It requires acceptance, forgiveness, or reorientation, often later than we would like. If constructive pain leads to growth, why do so many people avoid it? Because it asks something of us now. It interrupts comfort. It exposes uncertainty. It challenges self-image. Constructive pain forces confrontation. With limits. With fears. With responsibility. Destructive pain, by contrast, asks very little in the moment. It accumulates quietly. It allows the present to remain comfortable at the expense of the future. Understanding this helps remove self-blame. Avoidance is not usually laziness. It is often a preference for delayed consequences over immediate discomfort. Pain does more than shape outcomes. It shapes identity. When you consistently choose the pain of discipline, you reinforce an identity of reliability and resilience. You begin to see yourself as someone who can tolerate discomfort in service of something meaningful. When you consistently avoid discomfort, a different identity forms. One centered on short-term relief, rationalization, and lowered expectations. Neither identity forms overnight. Both are built through repetition. This is where the insight becomes personal. The pain you choose becomes the person you become. Choosing pain consciously can feel intimidating. It removes plausible deniability. When you choose discipline, you accept responsibility for the outcome. There is no one else to blame. This emotional weight is real. It is also why many people prefer unchosen pain. Regret can be externalized. Discipline cannot. Acknowledging this trade-off matters. Choosing constructive pain is not about toughness. It is about honesty. One common misunderstanding is believing that more pain equals more growth. It doesn't. Excessive strain without recovery leads to burnout, not progress. Another misunderstanding is romanticizing suffering. Pain is not virtuous in itself. It is only useful when it serves a clear purpose. There is also nuance here. Some pain signals harm, not growth. Discernment is required. The philosophy of die daily does not glorify endurance for its own sake. It values intentional effort aligned with meaning. Awareness begins when you stop expecting a pain-free path. Understanding deepens when you learn to distinguish between pain that teaches and pain that drains. The insight is simple but profound. You will carry pain either way. Choose the one that builds you. This choice does not require perfection. It requires consistency and self-awareness. In daily life, choosing constructive pain looks modest. Doing the hard thing first. Following through when enthusiasm fades. Sitting with discomfort instead of numbing it immediately, accepting temporary unease for long-term stability. These choices rarely feel heroic. They feel quiet. Sometimes inconvenient. Often unnoticed. But over time, they change how you experience yourself. There is no life without pain. There is only a life shaped by chosen pain or by avoided pain. The pain of discipline asks more of you today. The pain of regret takes more from you tomorrow. Neither path is painless. One is purposeful. Choosing the pain that builds you is not about harshness. It is about alignment. It is about deciding that short-term discomfort is a fair price for long-term integrity. When you make that choice repeatedly, not dramatically, but consistently, you don't just change your outcomes. You change who you are able to become. And that is the kind of pain worth carrying. Chapter 7. Dying daily without burning out. Many people begin change with intensity. They wake up one morning filled with resolve, determined to fix everything at once. New habits, new routines, new standards. For a short time, this surge of effort feels powerful. Then, just as predictably, it collapses. Burnout is often mistaken for weakness. Burnout is usually a signal of misaligned effort. People do not fail because they lack motivation. They fail because they try to compress transformation into a moment rather than allowing it to unfold over time. Die daily was never meant to be lived at full volume. It is meant to be lived sustainably. Intensity is energy applied in bursts. Sustainability is energy applied in rhythm. Intensity can be useful. It can break inertia and initiate change. But it is not designed to last. When intensity becomes the primary strategy, exhaustion follows. Sustainability, on the other hand, respects limits. It acknowledges that growth happens through repetition, not force. Sustainable effort may feel slower, but it compounds. Understanding this distinction is crucial. Without it, discipline becomes unsustainable, and even meaningful goals begin to feel oppressive. The urge to change everything at once often comes from dissatisfaction. When people feel far from the life they want, the gap feels overwhelming. In response, they attempt to close it in a single leap. This approach is emotionally understandable. It feels decisive. It feels like taking control. But it ignores a basic reality. Habits, identities, and systems are built over time. Trying to replace them all at once overloads the mind and body. The result is not transformation, but collapse. Real change asks for patience, not urgency. Burnout is often attributed to working too hard. In many cases, it is the result of ego-driven expectations. Ego, in this context, does not mean arrogance. It means an inflated sense of how much change should happen, how quickly it should happen, and how it should feel. Ego says, if I don't do it all now, I'm failing. If it's not hard, it doesn't count. I should be further along by now. These narratives create pressure that effort alone cannot sustain. Awareness begins when you notice that burnout often follows unrealistic self-demands, not meaningful work. Sustainable transformation follows rhythm, not strain. Rhythm includes effort and rest, focus and recovery, engagement and reflection. It allows intensity to appear in waves rather than as a constant state. In everyday life, this might look like building one habit at a time instead of many, allowing some days to be lighter without interpreting that as failure. Measuring progress in consistency, not intensity. Understanding progress as rhythm reduces guilt. It replaces self-criticism with self-regulation. The philosophy of die daily does not demand dramatic sacrifice. It asks for small, repeated choices. A small daily death might be saying no once, when you would usually say yes. Starting something you've been avoiding for 10 minutes instead of an hour. Ending a habit gently instead of abruptly. Choosing restraint in one moment instead of demanding perfection all day. These choices may seem insignificant. They are not. They are the building blocks of identity change. Small deaths are sustainable. Large, sweeping changes often are not. Patience is often misunderstood as passivity. In reality, patience is a form of strength. It is the ability to remain committed without rushing the process. Patience accepts that growth unfolds unevenly. Some days feel productive. Others feel quiet. Both are part of progress. This does not mean lowering standards. It means adjusting expectations to match reality. Understanding patience as strength allows you to stay engaged without burning out. One common misunderstanding is believing that sustainable effort lacks urgency. In truth, sustainability preserves urgency by preventing collapse. Another misunderstanding is thinking that burnout is a sign you should quit. Often, it is a sign you should recalibrate. It's also important to acknowledge that rest is not the same as avoidance. Rest restores capacity. Avoidance postpones responsibility. Discernment is essential. Awareness reveals that burnout often follows ego-driven urgency. Understanding reframes progress as a rhythm of effort and recovery. The insight is this: small daily deaths create lasting rebirths. Transformation is not a single event. It is a pattern. In practice, dying daily without burning out means choosing consistency over intensity, allowing progress to be imperfect but ongoing, letting go of the need to prove anything, trusting the process rather than forcing the outcome. These choices do not make headlines. They make lives stable. Transformation does not require exhaustion. It requires endurance. When you stop trying to change everything at once, you give change room to last. When you trade urgency for patience, effort becomes sustainable. Patience is not delay. It is direction maintained over time. And when you learn to die daily in small, deliberate ways, without burning out, you create a life that grows stronger, not brittle. This is how real change survives. Chapter 8. The Quiet Confidence of Alignment. There is a kind of confidence that does not announce itself. It does not rely on volume, performance, or external validation. You can feel it when you are around someone who carries it. They are not trying to prove anything. They move with a steadiness that comes from within. Many chase confidence as an outcome. They look for it in accomplishments, praise, or appearances. When those things fade, confidence fades with them. Die Daily offers a different path, one where confidence is not pursued directly, but emerges naturally when actions and values come into alignment. Alignment, in simple terms, means living in accordance with what you say matters to you. It is the match between your stated values and your daily behavior. Values are not what you admire or talk about. They are what your actions protect and prioritize. Alignment occurs when your choices reflect those priorities consistently. This is not about perfection. No one lives in complete alignment all the time. It is about direction. About whether your life generally points where you believe it should. Understanding alignment removes much of the mystery around confidence. Confidence is not a personality trait. It is a byproduct of integrity. When actions and values are misaligned, the result is inner conflict. This conflict shows up as mental noise, second-guessing, guilt, rationalization, and restlessness. You may recognize it in moments like saying yes when you meant no, then replaying the decision later. Making promises to yourself and quietly breaking them. Feeling uneasy without being able to name why. This noise drains energy. It fragments attention. Over time, it erodes trust in yourself. Awareness begins when you notice that discomfort often comes not from external pressure, but from internal contradiction. Self-trust is the foundation of quiet confidence. It is built slowly, through repeated experiences of reliability. When you do what you say you will do, even in small ways, you begin to believe yourself again. This belief does not require applause. It settles quietly. In real life, this might look like keeping a modest commitment to exercise rather than abandoning an ambitious plan. Stopping work when you decided you would, without guilt following through on a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Each kept promise reinforces the same message: I can rely on myself. This is where die daily begins to feel rewarding. Many people attempt to build confidence through big declarations, public commitments, dramatic resolutions, or sudden overhauls. These moments feel empowering, but their effect is often temporary. Confidence does not come from what you announce. It comes from what you sustain. When declarations are not followed by consistent action, they create dissonance. The gap between words and behavior becomes another source of inner noise. Understanding this shifts the focus from dramatic change to steady follow-through. One of the less obvious benefits of alignment is reduced mental effort. When your values are clear and your actions reflect them, decision-making becomes simpler. You spend less time negotiating with yourself, less time justifying choices, and less time recovering from internal conflict. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means it becomes clearer. Clarity is calming. Living in alignment has trade-offs. It often requires saying no to opportunities that look appealing but don't fit your direction. It may involve disappointing others or stepping away from familiar patterns. These moments can be uncomfortable, but they are temporary. The alternative, chronic misalignment, carries a heavier, longer-lasting cost, ongoing self-doubt and erosion of self-respect. Acknowledging this trade-off allows alignment to be chosen deliberately, not idealized. One common misunderstanding is believing alignment requires rigid rules. In reality, alignment allows flexibility. It adapts to seasons and circumstances while remaining rooted in core values. Another misunderstanding is thinking alignment eliminates doubt. It doesn't. It reduces unnecessary doubt, the kind created by inconsistency. It's also important to recognize that alignment is personal. What feels aligned for one person may not for another. Comparison often disrupts alignment more than any external obstacle. Awareness notices the shift from inner conflict to inner calm when alignment increases. Understanding reveals that this calm comes from reduced contradiction between values and actions. The insight is this: self-trust is built through kept promises, not big declarations. Confidence, then, is not something you perform. It is something you inhabit. In daily life, alignment looks quiet. Choosing consistency over intensity. Making fewer promises and keeping more of them, letting actions speak where words once tried to convince. These choices rarely attract attention. They do something more valuable: they restore coherence. Up to now, the work has required effort, restraint, and patience. Here the rewards begin to appear, not as excitement, but as steadiness. The quiet confidence of alignment does not depend on circumstances. It comes from knowing that your life is generally pointed in the right direction. When actions and values align, mental noise fades. Trust returns. And confidence emerges, not loudly, but reliably. You no longer need to prove who you are becoming. You are living it. And that is enough. Chapter 9. Living with fewer regrets. Most people don't think about regret until they are forced to. It often arrives quietly, after a season has passed, when a door has closed or an opportunity no longer feels reachable. In those moments, regret is rarely about what went wrong. It is about what was left undone. Regret is one of the few pains that grows heavier with time. It cannot be solved with effort alone, and it cannot be undone. Yet it is also one of the most preventable forms of suffering, not through perfection, but through intention. Die daily finds its long-term meaning here, in the simple idea that how you live each day determines how you will look back on your life. Regret is often misunderstood as a response to failure. In reality, regret more commonly comes from avoidance. People rarely regret trying and failing. They regret not trying at all. Not speaking when it mattered. Not starting when they could have. Not choosing when the choice was still available. Regret is the emotional cost of unresolved intention. It arises when there is a gap between what mattered to you and how you acted. Understanding this reframes regret from a judgment into information. It tells you something about your values. When people reflect honestly on past seasons of life, a pattern emerges. The discomfort they remember most clearly is not from effort, but from hesitation. Effort may have been difficult at the time, but it often comes with clarity afterward. Even when outcomes fall short, effort tends to leave people with a sense of engagement. They showed up. They participated. Avoidance leaves something unresolved. It leaves questions unanswered and possibilities untested. Over time, those unanswered questions accumulate. This is why people say, "I wish I had tried," far more often than "I wish I hadn't." Regret often hides behind reasonable-sounding delays. "I'll do it when things settle down." "I'm not ready yet." "Now isn't the right time." These statements are not lies. They are often sincere. But sincerity does not change their effect. Delay feels safe because it avoids immediate discomfort. Silence feels protective because it avoids conflict. Over time, both become habits. This is how regret forms, not through dramatic mistakes, but through repeated deferral of what mattered. Awareness begins when you notice how often delay substitutes for decision. One of the most powerful ways to reduce regret is to practice looking ahead honestly. This does not require imagining worst-case scenarios. It requires asking grounded questions. If I continue this pattern, where will it lead? What am I postponing that will not become easier with time? What would future me wish I had addressed now? These questions are not meant to induce fear. They are meant to clarify priorities. Honest reflection turns vague dissatisfaction into actionable insight. Regret is often treated as something to avoid thinking about. But when approached carefully, regret can be instructive. Regret highlights values. It shows what mattered enough to leave a mark. In that sense, it is not an enemy. It is feedback. Understanding this allows regret to inform decisions rather than paralyze them. You do not have to be ruled by past regret to learn from it. The key is timing. Learning early is far less costly than learning late. Daily discipline does not eliminate regret entirely. Life is complex, and some outcomes are beyond control. But discipline dramatically reduces unnecessary regret. Discipline creates alignment between intention and action. It ensures that important things are addressed before they become urgent or impossible. In everyday life, this looks unremarkable. Having the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. Taking small steps toward a goal instead of waiting for clarity to arrive. Acting on what you know matters, even when confidence is incomplete. These actions do not guarantee success. They do something more important. They prevent the lingering question of what if. A meaningful life is not a flawless one. Perfection is an unrealistic standard that often leads to paralysis. Intentionality is different. It means making choices with awareness and accepting their consequences. An intentional life allows for mistakes. It allows for misjudgments. What it does not allow is chronic avoidance of what you already know deserves attention. Understanding this relieves pressure. You do not need to get everything right. You need to engage honestly. Living intentionally comes with trade-offs. It requires effort when ease is available. It sometimes means choosing uncertainty over comfort. These trade-offs are real. They should not be minimized. But they are short-term costs. The alternative, living reactively, often carries long-term consequences that are harder to bear. Acknowledging this helps keep expectations grounded. Intentional living is not painless. It is purposeful. One common misunderstanding is believing regret can be avoided entirely. It cannot. Some regret is part of being human. Another misunderstanding is assuming regret means you failed. Often, it simply means you cared. There is also a tendency to believe that it is too late to change. While some opportunities do close, intention can still shape the present. Regret becomes most destructive when it leads to resignation. Discernment matters here. Some doors close. Others open when you act. Awareness looks ahead with honesty rather than fear. Understanding reframes regret as information about what matters most. The insight is this: daily discipline prevents lifelong remorse. Not by guaranteeing outcomes, but by ensuring engagement. Living with fewer regrets means acting before certainty arrives. Speaking when silence feels easier but wrong. Choosing small consistent actions over dramatic plans. Letting effort replace hesitation. These choices do not eliminate risk. They reduce remorse. The question is not whether life will be difficult. It will be. The question is whether difficulty will come from effort or from avoidance. When you live intentionally, you may still fail. You may still feel pain. But you will rarely feel the hollow ache of having not tried. A meaningful life is not perfect. It is honest. It is engaged. It is lived with attention. And when you look back, not with pride, but with clarity, you will see that the small daily choices you made mattered more than you realized. They didn't make life easy. They made it yours. Die Daily was never about losing yourself. It was about making room. Room for clarity. Room for strength. Room for the version of you that doesn't need to escape life, because they are finally living it. Each day offers a quiet choice. Not dramatic. Not loud. But deeply shaping. Something will die. And something will live. And over time, those small choices will tell a story. Not of perfection, but of becoming. Take a moment. Reflect. And notice what no longer needs to come with you tomorrow. That is where the future begins.